Ready?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. As the only non-contractor on the panel, I get to address the elephant in the room of tolling. So, and specifically as it might apply to I-70, which is obviously, I think, the biggest need in Missouri in the coming years. The problem, as I think you all know, I-70 is wearing out. Highways don't last forever. At some point, it becomes more cost-effective to reconstruct the whole thing than to continue with overlays and other kind of ongoing maintenance. There's also not enough lanes, especially with the growing truck traffic. The Federal Highway Administration projects that truck traffic in general over the next 30 years is going to grow at twice the rate of automobile traffic. And it's particularly important on corridors like I-70 that are major truck corridors. The Corridors of the Future study about 10 years ago concluded that the best solution for this corridor was to reconstruct it with dedicated truck lanes added to it. But, as you know, $4 billion is a lot of money, and there's no identified funding source for that. And so the question is there a way to actually do this project? And what I want to suggest to you today, by rethinking creatively about tolling, this could become a toll finance P3 project that I think could actually pass the political feasibility test. So let's take a look at that. So the idea would be toll financing with all electronic tolling, a P3 procurement as a toll concession, but very importantly, what I would call customer-friendly tolling policies as applied to both motorists and truckers, and a real genuine value proposition for the trucking industry that makes this corridor the best trucking corridor in the country. And let's try to see what that would mean. So the concerns that people have, obviously, both the public and most legislators are very leery of tolls in a state that doesn't really have a toll road history in the last 100 years. The trucking industry in general opposes any increased use of tolling, and for reasons that I think are quite understandable. And also legislators may see a project of this scale as inherently involving major debt financing and may be very leery of the state getting committed to that kind of additional debt. So we're going to talk about all of those as we go forward. First of all, it's very important when you think, if you ask people, do you want to pay tolls? Almost all will say no. But if you ask them, do you want to pay more gas taxes? They'll say no. If you want to ask them, will they pay more sales taxes? They'll say no. The question that really needs to be asked is, if there's a major need for a new transportation project that is not affordable with current funding sources, what is the least bad way to pay for that? And you give them a list of tolls for the new project, a sales tax increase, a gas tax increase. You have to quantify how much that would be to do the project. There's a decade worth of public opinion survey research that says in that kind of a choice, almost always tolls come out as the least bad alternative. Now, why would that be? I mean, when you actually think it through, people are pretty rational on this. Any tax alternative is going to apply across the board. People will know, well, if I say yes to this, the only thing I know for sure is I'm going to pay more tax. I'm not confident that any project is actually going to get built that I will use that'll make my life better. With the toll, if the toll is going to be for the specific project, people say, well, that's almost a no-lose because I'm only going to pay a toll if they build something that I'm going to use and if the toll is a reasonable value for what they've built. So that's almost a no-lose in comparison to the tax alternatives. And so that's why this project that's down there in the small type that was done by the Transportation Research Board in 2008, which you can go Google that, looked at 10 years of survey data and reached this general conclusion that tolling is more politically feasible than people think if it's presented as a set of alternatives and which is actually the least bad. The phrase that I saw in press coverage over several years when this subject has come up in Missouri is tolling existing capacity. Now that phrasing implies slapping tolls on something that's already there is going to be the same as it was before, except you're going to also have to pay tolls to use it. Well, that's a lose-lose proposition. Nobody would support that. But that's the way also the trucking industry tends to characterize proposals along these lines. Reconstructing worn-out, obsolete pavement is replacing existing capacity. The right-of-way is still in the same place, but you're replacing what's there, the stuff that really costs the money, with new capacity that's better than what was there before, and that will be better for a long, long period of time. It's not converting an quote-unquote existing highway into a toll road. It is using toll financing to replace a highway, an obsolete, worn-out highway, with something that's much better. And I think DOTs, legislators, everybody who talks about this needs to get the wording right, because the wording really does make a difference. And it describes a different reality of what the project would be. The other part of this, obviously, is that we need to create a value proposition for the people who would be expected to pay tolls for the improved highway, and that's what I'm going to talk about. First of all, I think in a state like Missouri that has no recent experience with tolling, most people's conception of tolling is coins in a basket after sitting in a long line at a toll plaza. That's what people think tolling is. We're in the 21st century now. Toll booths and toll plazas are going away. They're being phased out all over the country. Any new project that would use tolls in Missouri or any other state is not going to build toll plazas. I guarantee you. It would be completely ridiculous and not cost effective to do so. All electronic tolling is low cost, it's efficient, it has all kinds of advantages. You toll at highway speeds, you avoid all the safety concerns and pollution concerns of cars idling in a long line and hitting each other as they speed up to try to get ahead of the line. And the tolls are basically charged per mile driven. They don't have to be some round number of quarters. They're a rate that makes sense at the time for the miles driven, and people would pay the bill just like they pay for electricity based on how many kilowatt hours they use, or water based on how many thousand gallons they use. Now, we came up at Reason Foundation a few years ago with a concept called value-added tolling, specifically designed for situations like what you're facing here in Missouri, with the need to replace a worn-out facility that has not been tolled with a toll-financed approach. And it says we can write a new book on how the tolling is going to be done and what it's going to be. We don't have to do anything like they do in Pennsylvania, on the Pennsylvania Turnpike or the New York Thruway or any of those places. First of all, we listen to highway users' concerns about tolling. What do they find objectionable about tolls as they've been practiced historically, mostly in the 20th century? Develop new user-friendly tolling policies for projects like this, and specifically pay attention in particular to concerns and needs of the trucking industry, which is in fact, because they pay much higher rates than passenger cars, are going to probably pay for the majority of the costs of a toll finance project, particularly in a corridor like I-70. So, besides the obsolete concerns about toll plazas and toll booths, the remaining concerns that are very genuine that highway users have, number one, are no value added, the idea of slapping tolls on existing unimproved highways. Toll revenue being diverted to other uses so that the toll is partly a tax, not just a payment for the road you're using. Double taxation. If you drive the Pennsylvania Turnpike or any existing toll road, you're paying fuel taxes, federal and state, and the toll. So you're paying in effect twice to use the road. And that's a legitimate objection, I think, that not only truckers, but knowledgeable motorists have that objection also. It's why AAA has been ambivalent about expanding tolling in the United States. And fourth is traffic diversion. Any road that has a toll, some people are going to refuse to use it and are going to divert to a parallel road. So that's a real concern also that we've got to take into account in crafting policies. So first one, no value added. Missouri, as you probably know, has one slot in a 3-state federal pilot program that allows the use of toll finance to rebuild one interstate in each of those 3 states. The early applicants to that program, what they actually proposed doing was putting tolls on their interstates and maybe using some of the money to make improvements. They saw it as a funding source, a new revenue source. And those applications were turned down, fortunately, because it was contrary to what Congress had intended. Only Missouri and North Carolina put in serious proposals that would actually under Steve in North Carolina, and here under Missouri DOT's enlightened leadership, proposals that would actually be intending to reconstruct completely a major interstate. But so far, as you know, in this state and in North Carolina, there is not political consensus yet on doing that. So nobody has actually done this yet. But the point is that if you use the tolls solely to reconstruct and improve the facility, that is adding value. You're not asking people to pay for something that's already there. Diverting toll revenues. We've looked at this extensively at Reason Foundation. About a dozen toll agencies, but they're high-profile ones like the New York Thruway and the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey and the Pennsylvania Turnpike, divert toll revenue to other uses. And this just drives the truckers and AAA crazy. The least bad, but it's still bad in my view, is diverting the toll revenue to other non-toll highways. Several in the New York, New Jersey area, they divert a lot of toll revenue to urban mass transit. Half a dozen states at least divert toll revenues to economic development, which typically means pork barrel project that legislators like. Let's speak plainly. Canals in the New York State Thruway Authority is required by the legislature to use toll revenues to help pay for the Erie Canal, it's still in operation, and other canals in New York State. And public buildings. New York City, the World Trade Center is supported by the toll revenues people pay on the bridges and tunnels that the Port Authority operates. This has started to concern the rating agencies. There's a quote there from Maria Madisons of Moody's, wrote a report a couple years ago called The Cash Cowification of Toll Roads. And it turns out that those toll agencies that divert toll revenues have worse credit ratings. They have to pay higher interest rates for their bonds because they're diverting toll revenue and not using it solely for the toll roads. Double taxation. I crunched some numbers on this. On a typical interstate like I-70 that does not have tolls on it, the average federal fuel tax plus, this is for motorists, not truckers, average federal fuel tax plus state fuel tax divided by the miles driven works out to 2.2 cents a mile, okay? The average interstate that has a toll on it, it has the 2.2 cents a mile of federal plus state fuel taxes, plus the toll works out to 6.5 cents per mile. Now, I think toll roads are generally better maintained and blah, blah, blah. But can you imagine that the value to the motorist is 3 times as high on a tolled interstate as on a non-tolled? That's crazy. That's not a value proposition, folks. So we've got to deal with that problem if we expect highway users to consider a realistic value proposition. Diversion to parallel routes. And we know this happens. Anybody who does a traffic and revenue study for a potential toll project has to calculate the potential diversion rate, how much traffic would divert off. And it does cause impacts on the pavement, on the parallel routes. It does cause noise and blah, blah, blah. But a key point that you learn if you do traffic revenue analysis is that the higher the toll rates, the more traffic diversion there will be. So this is a good public policy reason to try to have the toll rates as low as possible to keep the traffic diversion as low as possible. And so that gets back to the question of if you're planning to divert a lot of toll revenue to other uses, your toll revenues are going to be much higher than they need to be. Therefore, the diversion of traffic is going to be much higher. That's a very important point to keep in mind. Yes, sir.
On this question of diversion,
yeah.
if you apply it to Highway 70 as the thoroughfare for the entire country, do you think that we're going to have as much diversion if it became a toll road as you would in another example?
Probably not, but it's interesting. When Ohio Turnpike did a big toll increase 5 or 6 years ago, they had a lot of short-term diversion, especially by trucks, because trucks pay a much higher rate. And it was so bad that they ended up reducing the toll rates, not back to what they were before, but reduced them from the level that had caused so much diversion. So, I mean, even on a corridor like Ohio Turnpike is I-80, is it, or 90, whatever it is, it's a major truck route also, and so it's still a real consideration. So the point is, though, that the lower the toll rate, the lower the diversion will be. And this is well-known fact. So we put together this thing called value-added tolling that tries to take these principles seriously and say, Here's the policies going forward that we could apply in states that are wanting to apply 21st century tolling to a reconstruction of an interstate. Limit the toll revenues to the toll facilities only. That's all they're for. They're not a general revenue source for the state DOT. Number two, charge only enough to cover the full capital and operating costs. Begin the tolling only when the construction of a segment or reconstruction of a segment is finished. So you're not asking people to pay when they're not getting the value of the improved facility. And use, here's the most important, use the tolls to replace, not to supplement, the existing fuel taxes. And go into these, first of all, limiting the use of the revenues to the facilities. This is the basic user pay, user benefit principle that says this is really a charge like your electric bill. It's only going for the facility that you're using, and it's based on how much you use it. It therefore limits the amount of the toll, the height level of the toll, and how much traffic diversion there's going to be compared to if the toll were doing other things besides just that facility. And this can be defined at the system level. It could be, for example, if you would want to have eventually rebuild all the interstates in Missouri and use toll financing, you could take the rural interstates as a system. You could also take the urban interstates as a system, and the weaker facilities, the toll revenue, the stronger facilities some toll revenue could support the weaker ones, but it would be only interstates that this principle applies to, and would be limited to that system. You protect this, you protect the users, so this is a credible promise by the enabling legislation that the legislature would pass, making a long-term promise of this, and build it into the bond covenants so that the bondholders would stand by to help enforce it as well, because their interest is not in having revenue diverted. Charge only enough for the full capital and operating costs. Well, obviously that includes initial construction of new lanes and reconstruction of existing lanes, all the O&M costs, any approved additions over, let's say, assuming it was a 50-year or 35-year concession, future widening, new entrances would have to be allowed for and payable for, and a reasonable return on investment to the people who finance the project and provide the capital. Reason Foundation did a major study, there's a reference at the end of the presentation, in 2013, looking at all 50 states at the potential feasibility of toll finance, reconstruction, and widening of interstates. Our baseline toll rates for cars were 3.5 cents a mile, for trucks were 14 cents a mile, and with the provision those would be CPI adjusted, and we assumed an annual 2.5% inflation rate. It was before today's inflation rates being so low, but anyway. And we found that 2/3 of the states could rebuild their rural interstates using rates at that level or lower, and in fact it was lower in Missouri. And here's a sample of interstate toll rates as of 2010. I didn't have time to look them up again to what they are this year. But you can see that almost all of them are significantly higher than the 3.5 cents a mile that we put in, particularly Pennsylvania Turnpike, which does a huge amount of revenue diversion. And our numbers for Missouri, for rural interstates were 2.1 cents a mile for cars and 8.3 cents a mile for trucks. Now, realistically, there's probably things we didn't completely consider. So think about something in between the 2.1 and the 3.5 cents as probably more realistic for I-70. But this is an illustration of these were value-added tolls. They considered only the capital and operating costs of the interstates involved. No diversion of revenue, no general revenue source or any of that sort of thing. And these rates were based on including the O&M costs in the project, not just the capital costs of the reconstruction. Toll only when the reconstruction, this is just like doing a toll bridge. You don't have the ability, because people can't get across it, to charge the tolls, and you treat these consistent with the idea you only pay when you get better value. And it's bad enough to ask people to live through a reconstruction of, let's say, I-70 without charging them while they're living through that horror. Only charge when they get something new and better to do it. And all right, here's the sticking point for most DOTs. In order to not have double taxation, you have to give people who use the tolled interstate a rebate on their state fuel taxes. Now, federal, that's a whole different question. You have to get Congress. Congress is not going to go there at this point in time. But you could do a state rebate. It turns out New York and Massachusetts already do this. It's a cash-based, you have to save receipts, it's a very cumbersome process, and not very many people take advantage of it. With all electronic tolling, this is a simple software exercise. You already know who the customer is, you know the make and model of their vehicle, you know the EPA fuel economy rating, therefore you know based on how many miles they drove, how many gallons they use approximately, and what the per gallon rate is, and so therefore you calculate the rebate amount. And a file gets sent to the DMV or the DOT every month or every quarter of how much the rebates are owed to people. This could be applied against their annual vehicle registration fee as a simple way to do it instead of sending out checks. But anyway, it's simple in principle to do. So the benefits of doing this project as a toll finance P3 concession would be quite manifold. You've got a case to sell to highway users for smooth modern pavement that would last a long, long time, much less congestion because of additional lanes, increased safety if you actually do the separate lanes for heavy trucks that were called for in the Corridors of the Future study, which I strongly recommend, rebates of the gas taxes for the miles driven so that they're not doing double payment, and guaranteed long-term maintenance for this very most important corridor in the entire state. That's a nice package of benefits. Now, beyond that, trucking industry would get all that too. What else does the trucking industry want? We did a big study that came out this summer called Truck-Friendly Tolling that spent a lot of time talking with trucking industry people, off-the-record discussions, and researching what the trucking industry is already doing with respect to tolling. They really want the safety benefits from dedicated truck lanes. They also want to be able to use longer and heavier rigs, like they're called longer combination vehicles, LCVs, that they cannot use currently on I-70 in Missouri, but which give them big productivity gains and environmental savings because you get more ton miles per driver and more ton miles per gallon of fuel in these longer combination vehicles. They also want safe overnight parking, which is in very, very short supply on America's interstates. Truck drivers, especially with the new hours of service rules, they have to pull off somewhere and sleep when they get tired. And there just aren't enough places. So this could be built into a project design as a way of making it a more truck-friendly highway. You'd also, automated vehicles are coming. There are semi-automated truck models in highway operational testing now. You don't have to be fully automated in order to do platooning. You want a safe corridor where this kind of thing, trucking for the future, can take place. And to have I-70 in Missouri to be the first corridor set up with dedicated truck-only lanes where this could be done, I think would be another significant benefit to the trucking community. They also have concerns. They talk about, even with all electronic tolling, you've got a dashboard full of transponders or windshield full of transponders, invoices from all these different toll providers, blah, 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 blah. It turns out, we learned through research, all three of these features, including confidential billing and routing information, are already being provided by two national vendors that are ATA-approved vendors. One is called BestPass, and the other is called PrePass Plus. This is available in all 16 Easy Pass states in the East and Midwest. And BestPass is already moving into any other state that has tolling. They're now starting to offer this service there also. They get one transponder for the truck that serves all these different toll facilities. They get a single monthly invoice, itemizes everything, and that's entirely confidential information that has worked very, very well for the trucking. So these ideas that these would be big problems for them, they're already being solved, and they're not really a real objection. Reasonable truck toll rates. The rates that we are suggesting would be feasible, are significantly less than on eastern toll roads because the big ones all divert toll revenue. The rebate of the state diesel tax would further reduce the cost to the trucker for getting this much better facility. And the state would come out ahead, state DOT would still come out ahead because the per mile rate for both cars and trucks of the toll would be more by probably at least double than the per mile rate that you're getting from the state gasoline and diesel tax today. Plus, you could forget about having to allocate money in the future for the next 50 years for maintaining I-70 because that would all be coming out of the toll revenue. So there's a value proposition there for the state DOT as well, even with the rebates. So a couple more to wrap up. as a toll concession project, I think somebody explained already that we look at Greenfield projects refers to brand new toll roads where there was never a road at all before. And there are some of those being built around the country. Brownfield projects are things like the Indiana Toll Road, where it's an existing toll road where somebody takes it over and becomes responsible for maintenance and improvements. Greenfields are considered high-risk projects. Brownfields are considered low-risk projects. Well, I-70 reconstruction and widening is kind of a hybrid of the two. It has characteristics of a brownfield project because there's already a long known traffic history, and you apply a small diversion rate to that for low tolls, and you don't have that big of a traffic and revenue risk. But it has some of the greenfield risk because there's a lot of new construction, reconstruction, and the added lanes and so forth. But that combination, midway in risk between greenfield and brownfield, should be very attractive to P3 investors. And I think if there were a lot of these projects going on, it would be a huge boon for the P3 industry. Who would invest? Equity investors such as global infrastructure funds, pension funds, and contractors, and debt markets. We've heard already tax-exempt private activity bonds. Bank loans are financing, particularly a shorter-term financing, and federal TIFIA loans. So the money is there. The ironic thing is that we have all this weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth at the state level and in Congress, but there's no money. Where's the money going to come from? The infrastructure funds and the pension funds are floating in money, looking for good projects to invest in. There's no shortage of money to invest in good highway projects in this country. A lot of these global funds and pension funds are investing over in other countries. They're not investing much in the United States simply because there's not a project pipeline of good bankable projects. So the funding is there if you create the mechanism to attract it. Now, another question, would I-70 toll bonds be state debt? And the answer is no if it's a revenue risk concession. The toll road bonds would be revenue bonds secured by the toll revenues of the project. They would not be state debt. This would be project finance that was non-recourse to taxpayers. And that's how toll financing is done all across the country. And it's part of shifting the risk from taxpayers to investors. So now it's true that if the project were done as an availability payment concession, but still with the state DOT collecting the toll roads, then there's a question, how will the rating agencies look at that? And that depends on how robust the toll revenues appear to be. If the toll revenues appear to be strong, then they would not score that very much as state debt. But if the toll revenues look shaky, then at least for the first 5 or 10 years, the availability payment obligation would probably be counted to some extent in measuring the state's debt capacity. So that's the reality of the situation. There's trade-offs there, therefore, for deciding how to do the project. So I think this is the last slide. The window of opportunity that Missouri currently has with the slot in the pilot program might close. In the Senate bill, the bill to reauthorize the federal program that was passed by the Senate, which may or may not stay there, but the version that was passed, called the DRIVE Act, modifies the pilot program. It doesn't add more states, but it adds a use it or lose it provision that says that a state like Missouri that holds a slot from the date of passage of the DRIVE Act has a certain period of time, I think it's 1 year, to take certain key legislative and policy actions to say, we're serious, we're going to do this. And there's a second deadline in there that says you have to actually be underway to start implementing the project by that second deadline, or your slot goes away. So I think you really need to make sure the legislature, assuming this passes, some version of this may very well pass. A lot of the discussion I've had with congressional committees in both the Senate and the House suggests that they're kind of frustrated that nobody's really done a project yet. And yet, if another state actually wants to try to do this, they can't, because you guys are sitting on the slots and hogging the available space. So, word to the wise, this is a real factor that's out there. So, the summary, my points to leave with you today. The replacement and widening of I-70 is truly needed. It's probably the single most important piece of infrastructure in your state. There is no current source of the $4 billion that it will take to do this right in a way that really provides benefits. As far as I can tell, toll financing is the only feasible way to pay for this. Whether the state does the tolling and that uses an availability structure, or whether it's a revenue risk concession and the private sector does the tolling. The value-added tolling principles that I've outlined here, I think could make a key difference in getting support from highway users, including trucking companies. And I think P3 procurement would be very attractive to the investment community if the project were presented in this way. And just as a reference, when you get a copy of this, these are 3 key studies that are available on the Reason Foundation website on which this talk is based. The overall study of the whole feasibility of doing interstate reconstruction, the value-added tolling study that walks through and explains the principles, and then the specific application to the trucking industry that just came out in July of this year. So with that, I thank you, and I'll be happy if you have any immediate questions. If not, we can do those at the end of the day. Anything? Okay. Yes, yes, sir.
Are there any other U.S. toll roads that have dedicated truck lanes?
There are not. There are no. The only kind of dedicated truck lanes that we have in the United States are climbing lanes in mountainous states. Those are all on non-toll roads. The New Jersey Turnpike has truck lanes of a sort, but they're not truck only. They're longer distance lanes that a lot of people use because they tend to be somewhat less congested because of all